Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod, where every week we dive into a different practice, a different perspective on life, and you try it out with us. Join us on Substack at mindbodpod.com to watch this episode as a video podcast. And if you want to support our crazy adventures and get fun perks and exclusives along the way, join us as a paid subscriber. Now, onto this week's adventure.
Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod. I'm your host, Jeff Warren, and with me here is...
I'm Tasha Schumann.
So we're very excited to introduce our listeners to Sherri Mitchell. If you don't know her already, you should. This book has been like my Bible for 2 years, Sacred Instructions. It's just a phenomenal book. The subtitle is Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change, and it is such a pure and brilliant distillation of basically the medicine that we need right now. And that's going to be our focus in this conversation. How do we really live in this moment? How do we meet this moment? What are some of the tools we can use, some of the practices? Sherri Mitchell, we're really excited to get to meet you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. If you don't mind, I'm going to just start out by introducing myself in my language to just acknowledge where I come from and honor my own ancestors who I've called in to be here with us today. So, Kwe Pasidawin, hello everyone. My name in my language is Wanahamogwasit. I am from the Penobscot Nation. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Tubaik. And I'm very happy to be able to share this time with you today.
One of the things you talk about in the book is how these teachings, these instructions had largely been passed on orally and passed on just through the life of the tribe, the life of the different cultural groups, and that you were encouraged at a certain point by your elders to bring them out in the world. I'm just curious a little bit about that story or how that happened.
Yeah, there is a group of elders. I was very fortunate, even though I'm an Indigenous woman who is, 10 times more likely to experience violence on this earth than any other population of people, I still possess privilege of ancestry. I possess privilege of belonging to a community of people, possess belonging to interconnected nation. I have privilege of knowing my cultural traditions and having been raised in a strong ceremonial family. And I recognize that that is something that has been a real gift to me that not all people have had the opportunity to experience. And so I don't want to be cavalier about the experiences that brought me to that place. So I had been working for probably 25 years, I guess, maybe a little longer at that point, with a group of spiritual elders, the Indigenous Elders and Medicine Peoples Council of North and South America, and had been behind the scenes helping to bring forward some of their messages, doing a lot of listening for a good chunk of my life. And at that time had spent quite a long time helping to bring some of the traditional spiritual elders' messages to different decision-making bodies like the UN, the United States Congress, and other places.
Because you have a law degree, in addition to all of your lived experience, you're also kind of a badass lawyer, which is totally obvious in the book with the focus on rights and responsibilities. So many ways that comes out. So you're uniquely qualified to do that.
Yeah, so I was doing that work pretty intensely at that time, not doing it anymore. Thankfully, I'm doing something completely different now. And there were a number of elders who wouldn't even sign their names to documents because of the understanding of the power of our spoken word. So finishing up a new book called Rise Wild, and the first chapter in that new book is Indigenous Oral Traditions and the Sacred Science of Sound. And so this recognition that our living words have a vibrational frequency that imparts something very different than the written word can ever impart, and that it moves and shapes around those who are speaking the words and those who are receiving those vibrations at that time. And so it's something that can move across time, which is why we believe that our stories have endured across time, is because they have been allowed to stay alive, to be a living expression of the people who are carrying the stories and telling the stories and experiencing the stories. And they were very adamant about not writing things down. And I had been a writer my whole life. From my earliest memories, one of my aunts has a letter that I wrote her when I was 4 years old and said she was going to save it someday because, she knew that I was going to end up being a writer. And I hadn't done that because of those teachings. And then one day I was sitting in ceremony with some of these elders, and one of them, this beautiful man from Gila River named Bennett Lyons, who was the most gentle and kind human being, pulled me aside and said, "This is what you have to do because you have this within you. And you can't just continue writing down other people's words. You have to bring forward what's within you and begin to share that with the world, because if you don't, it's going to make you sick. And so this is your gift and this is your purpose, and you need to begin moving in that direction and trusting yourself." And it still took me a couple of years to take that in and to, overwrite all of these years of training around that belief. And then Bennett passed unexpectedly, and I was devastated because I hadn't done what he had asked me to do in a time that he could have seen it with his own eyes. In this plane of existence, I'm sure that he's seen it from where he is now. And so that really became the impetus for me writing the book, was to honor all of the teachings that I had received from him and countless other elders over the years who I, not only respected, but deeply love, and who have been just a fundamental part of the forming of my being. And so it's really an introduction to a way of seeing and a way of being that has been largely stereotyped and diminished and dismissed and made trite by those who sought to make us invisible. And part of the purpose was really to bring forward some of the deeper knowing that's inherent within our traditions that has been ignored largely by the wisdom traditions, the other wisdom traditions of the world, to give it its rightful place amongst those traditions. And so Sacred Instructions was the beginning. Rise Wild is a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the teachings. And so, that's how it came to be.
Well, that's how I experienced it. And it's interesting what you say about the sound part of it. I listened to it first as an audiobook. It really affected me very strongly. I mean, I think there is a kind of transmission there. Your voice, you have a very settled presence in the book, but very strong. And I read it afterwards. And, as a meditator, when I'm reading a book, I notice that I'm saying the words in my head. Like there is something of a kind of oral transmission that continues, in the sense that it's now my voice telling it. It's your voice turning into my voice. And I think that's pretty interesting. And I imagine that's the case for everyone listening in a way. So, okay, so here we are. This book lays out a very different way to think about the problems that we're in, the challenges that we're facing right in this exact moment. I mean, you cover everything from how to think about conflict as a real growth opportunity, like a lot of empowered framing about seeing ourselves as being exactly the medicine necessary for this time. The balance of rights and responsibilities. There's just so many layers to what you talk about. And I'm heartened to know there's a part 2 that goes even deeper, because I'll be the first reader. But anywhere you want to begin in that to help reorient folks?
Sure. So let me ask you a question. Are we just diving in, or are we paddling out? How would you prefer to proceed? Because if we dive right in and we allow ourselves to consider possibilities, then we may be ready for that practice.
Let's do that then. That sounds good. I feel like this is, but just before our call, Jeff and I were talking about, every wisdom tradition that's quite connected to earth and ecology in general talks about the struggles of this time. In my lineage, we call it the Kali Yuga, this like quickening, this charged moment that is like hyper violent, but also provides this opportunity for clear seeing and clear cutting through that maybe didn't exist before. And I think that makes people primed for the jumping in. I think especially as teachers and guides, we sometimes want to, ease people into things. But the world is not easing people.
That's for sure.
People are waist deep in the muck, and I think people are ready to jump in.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is a critically important first moment is to recognize that we are in the midst of the transitional phase of birth, and that anybody that's given birth will tell you that it is a messy business. It's incredibly painful. It's awe-inspiring. It's terrifying. From the moment you first see this little tiny being on this little black and white picture that is now living inside of you to the moment you're holding them in your arms, there are varying states of terror that you go through all along the way because you know that your life is never going to be the same. And so just acknowledging that we are in that process right now, where we're traveling through various states of grieving what has been and has been lost, not only in our own lives, but all of the species that have been lost, that have gone out of this world into another place, grieving the idea of life that we thought we would have based on our upbringing in the previous paradigm. I know that this is something that's been incredibly painful for men, and a lot of men have been cast out and canceled
Yes.
for being who they thought were good men, according to the teachings of the old paradigm that's dying out. And many of them have been caught between paradigms. And what I've seen happen to a lot of men has been pretty violent and emotionally brutal and severing. And I think that's why in this country we've seen such a backlash of movement to the far right of our young men, because we've forgotten our responsibility towards them.
Yes.
You know,
I
we've
agree.
forgotten to help them reconnect to their hearts. Instead, we claimed that they were heartless, not that they were victims of having their hearts trampled. And so I think that shifting through this process of birthing is causing a lot of things that we feel victimized by, and we don't realize our role in the perpetuation of the harms that we're experiencing. And so, just starting from that place and recognizing all of the grief, all of the fear, all of the anger, all of the uncertainty that we're facing in this moment is really important for people to allow themselves to cycle through all of the emotions, because what this time is asking of us is that we grow emotionally, that we learn how to recognize the fleeting nature of our emotions, to recognize them as informative, as guides, but not as drivers of our vehicle, and really gaining a sense of spiritual maturity as well, where we see beyond the immediacy of our individualized concerns. So, as we're in this process of birthing this new world, there are those who are attempting to abort that new life in the womb and prevent it from coming forth. One of the things that we know to be true is that the most powerful force we have ever experienced as human beings living this life here is the life force that has not been able to be restrained, that has not been able to be stopped, that has continued despite obstacle across all time. And so how do we then tap into that flow of the force of life as it's bringing forth this new way of being in relationship with one another? While those who are terrified of the changes that are coming are attempting to move us further and further and further away from that life by separating us from our humanity. And there are a lot of things that we can be doing in this moment to reconnect ourselves to that force of life. And one of the easiest things to do is to limit our access to technology, to make sure that we are putting our feet on the soil every single day, that we are coming in contact in some way with the natural living world. Because what this force that's attempting to block the emergence of this new way of being, his intent on separating us from the living world. moving us to a post-human existence where technology becomes God. So when we transfer our understanding of the power of life away from the sources of our lives toward a non-living entity, we sever the tie that we have to the chain of life. And it's the most dangerous thing that we can be doing. It's so much easier to just move with the technological babysitters that govern the lives of children and adults, that are moving us like a Pied Piper's dance further and further away from the truth of our being. It's much harder for us to avoid the intoxication and seduction of those things and do the hard work of digging in the soil to plant plants, to haul water, to nurture and to cultivate those shoots as they're growing, to be in direct contact with our own sources of nourishment for our own bodies. You know, even in death, we've been separated from the earth by being put in containers loaded with chemicals and then placed in the ground inside another cement container to prevent us from having this reciprocal relationship with the land that we were meant to have. So this one-way street of depletion from Nicoskikdimik from Mother Earth, and this lack of proper return and reciprocity that has been happening here has harmed Mother Earth to the degree that she cannot keep up with our demands, which puts us all in a very precarious position. And so, you know, I think this moment asks us to reach back to the things that we know have kept us connected to the umbilical of the earth, our winds, our waters, our soils, fires, all of the things that have helped us to survive when 9 other humanoid species before us failed to do so. We did that by learning how to collaborate and cooperate and live in community with one another. You know, and so this individualized, technocratic reality is breaking apart our communities. It's weakening all of us by separating us from one another and from the living world. So in this moment, all of the things that we can do to reconnect with that. And, you know, Jeff, you're talking about the things that you're envisioning for this time with kindness, with compassion, with loving care, with attention to the needs of the nervous systems of those that we love and are in relationship with, because people's nervous systems are being blown out left and right. You know, this is something that you're assisting with in the work that you're doing, is to help people bring their nervous systems back to ground and keeping them intact. And so all of the things that we can be doing right now to address all of those things is going to determine the path that we take going forward. One of the things that I talked about in this blog is the fact that we are, in fact, co-creating the reality that we're living in. And we have been attributing the revelation of that to clairvoyance of previous authors. So, you know, there are a lot of people who say that we're living out the realities of Orwell's 1984. We're living out the realities of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. We're living out the realities of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. We're even seeing this clairvoyant capacity being exhibited from the writers of The Simpsons show, right? Like there's this clairvoyance that's being attributed to this moment because we have yet to understand the power of co-creation that we possess. And so the possibility for us to recognize in this moment, the opportunity that is ripe, is for us to recognize that we are not predicting the future. We are, in fact, creating it.
Yeah.
And once we accept that we are creating the reality that we're living by holding images aloft, breathing life into them, experiencing the emotions that they bring up, intensifying them, sharing those images and those stories across time, across space, that we are actually creating the perfect creation scenario for them to exist in form. And then when we manifest those things, we're like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? You know, people are perfectly comfortable with putting images up on their little vision board, right? And creating what they see there and marveling over, wow, it's the exact same house that I put on my vision board that I ended up living in 10 years later. Why is it a stretch to believe that all of these powerful images that have been held and read and spoken to and felt by millions are actually creating the reality that we're walking into today? And what does that mean about our responsibility to changing the narrative to create the reality that we want to walk in tomorrow?
That points directly to one of my favorite chapters in this whole book, which is the rights and responsibility chapter. And I think it's such a difficult conversation to have, especially in this time where so many people are waking up to their own trauma, pointing at things in their lives they didn't realize were maybe not theirs, that they were holding on to as in guilt ways or things that were holding them back, and realizing this is part of bigger systemic issues. And so there's a lot of rights language right now where people are, rightfully searching for, demanding rights, demanding a better world. But then there's this piece around responsibility. What is our responsibility if we're asking for this kind of change? How do we step away from the sidelines, step into the fray and say, this is the change that I want, and I am taking my responsibility to make that happen? How do you see framing that in this moment where sometimes that's very triggering to say that to somebody who, very rightfully wants change, who doesn't see maybe even their agency to take on a responsibility?
Right. Let's start with triggering. I think that it's another word that has been largely overused and abused. It's a challenge. It's a distortion. It's a manipulation of truth that we are existing in this moment. And this moment is not today. This is lifetimes. Like if we look at the long span of time, this place that we're living in right now is a blip on the radar, in the long span of time. And so, this epoch that we are existing within right now misuses and overuses the word triggering because we're so emotionally immature that we can't deal with complicated feelings.
Absolutely.
And so triggering becomes an excuse not to deal with complicated feelings. And the chapter on conflict in the book is like, listen, we have to be able to manage conflict, not just with others, but within ourselves. What are these conflicting feelings that I'm having coming up? Why am I feeling uncomfortable? Because we have been raised to believe that discomfort is our enemy rather than our teacher and our friend. And so, we have avoided much of our work by saying, you can't say anything in this space that's going to trigger me, meaning we can't talk about difficult things. We can't work through complicated problems that are emitting difficult feelings within us. So, looking at that right there, that's our primary responsibility, is addressing our own emotional and spiritual growth so that we can sit with, be in the room with the complicated, painful things that we have been avoiding and escaping all along so that we can become whole human beings. We can't be whole human beings if we're shutting out an entire part of our lives.
And we can't come to any decisions if we're not able to sit at a table with people we disagree with. That's one of the main parts of that chapter that I love so much, is that conflict leads to growth. It's through conflict, internally, externally, that we can actually see things that we haven't wanted to see, that other views come to the table, and that the idea is to move away from a I'm right, you're wrong mindset, which is completely what's dominated the media sphere and the legacy that we're living in, to something very different that's like, actually everyone deserves to have their perspective out there, and then through that airing those out, we can come to some kind of common agreement. But you can't do that unless you hear everyone's voice.
And I kind of see, there's this trend that's kind of crested and sort of past right now. But for a while, we were talking about safe spaces, that every space has to be safe. In one way, that's like a beautiful offering from the person or people trying to hold space, saying your voice is welcome here. But on the other side, it's kind of what you're talking about, this idea that you're walking into spaces that have to cater to your lack of being able to hold difficult things. I'm seeing more and more now people who are teaching courses or holding community spaces saying, I'm showing up with love in my heart and compassion in my heart to do the best that I can, but it is not my responsibility to make this place safe for you. The world is not safe, you know?
Right.
So in certain ways, I think some people are kind of realizing how limiting that is, but it's still absolutely a part of our culture, especially online.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's been used as an excuse for avoiding, controlling, excluding certain folks. And, you know, we have diminished our own capacity by making certain things prohibited. We have been quick to label people who are questioning some of the ways that we're transforming. And if we don't question the ways that we're transforming and how some of those habits, some of those patterns are being taken from the patriarchal apparatus and put wholesale into new clothing and being sold as something different, we actually block our progression because what we're creating is just a reflection of the same in a different appearance. And so if we can't talk about the ways that we're transforming, if we can't talk about the fact that women have been oppressed, commodified, subjugated for millennia, and that their hard-won rights cannot be diminished by the appearance of new expressions in the mainstream, then how do we prevent that from happening again? How do we make space for everyone to exist if we're using the same language that was used previously to shut women down? You know, this is a nuanced conversation that has a beautiful opportunity for everybody to be part of it. That conversation about non-binary space, that conversation about multiple gender identities is helping us shatter the binaries in our mind.
Absolutely.
It's a moment of expansion of our awareness and our intelligence. And it's an expansion of our ability to see more than one way of being.
Mhm.
And when we don't allow conversation around without being labeled, it shuts us down and becomes an obstacle to our growth and our movement. And so, how do we have difficult conversations with individuals who have spent their whole lives fighting for basic rights for women, to be then told that people who give birth can no longer be called mothers? You know, there's just this foolishness that we have created around language that prevents us from seeing the humanity in one another. And if we can't say that out loud without being labeled in some negative way and shut down and canceled, how do we create a balanced, loving progression forward for our entire species? We can't. It's impossible. So we have to take responsibility for our own emotional maturity. We have to also take responsibility for the fact that, you know, adults throw tantrums just like children when they don't get their way. And some of this is an expression of an adult tantrum. And our expectation that we're always going to get our way also inhibits us from moving forward, because there's something that happens when you're in loving, honest, open, compassionately aware relationship with another human being. You have your identity, they have their identity. And when you come together, something brand new exists. You're both changed by it. That's how it's supposed to work, because that's about including and moving forward. It's about including and expanding, which is something that the status quo and the patriarchy has done very, very well. But we have failed to do as individuals and collectives. And I think that's something we need to start paying attention to. How do we take on new information, allow it to expand us from a heart-centered place, and then roll forward collectively together in a way that creates something brand new? Because what we're doing right now is we're framing the new that we're going to walk into. And if all we're doing is artfully describing the water that we're drowning in, we're going to continue to drown. And so we need to actively be looking at the land, the solid ground that we want to be standing upon, and building that 80% of that 80-10-10 rule.
Yeah, did we mention the 80
No, we haven't
10
yet.
rule? I'll just say, and I actually thought this is the perfect setup for you to guide us in a practice. One of the parts of your book I love is that so much of it is about the importance and the power of visioning and imagination and being able to bring in that new world like you've described. And so you have this idea of the 80-10-10 rule, and 10% of your attention should be on legitimately looking at the world's problems, the ugliness of what's going on, because you can't see what needs to change if you're just looking away. So that is really important. And then 10% of your energy and your attention going into trying to mitigate those exact things as they're happening. But that 80% of your intention, your attention, should really be on that better world, on what is coming down that birth canal. And so I wonder if there's a way for you to guide us in a practice of that world, like what is coming, like what is that world that you see of our best intentions. I'd love you to help us frame that in a practice so we can kind of set our minds to that.
Okay, so let's take a bit of a journey together. So get comfortable in your seat. Take a settling breath. Close your eyes. And picture yourself seated on the earth in a comfortable, safe space. Feel the earth rising up to meet you so that you are being solidly held by the soil that exists beneath you. And I want you to recognize, not directly, just as a passing truth, that the soil that you're sitting on is not ordinary soil. It contains the dust, the bones, and the blood of the ancestors who have lived upon that land for generations. And acknowledge the presence of those ancestors on that land. Thank them for the lives that they've lived and for all of the things that have transpired before this moment of you being present on this land, wherever you are. Now I want you to imagine that the ground is slowly softening and beginning to open up gently beneath you. Despite this movement, you feel reassured, lovingly guided. So as the land softens and opens up further and further, you are being carried on a very warm, gentle stream right down to the heart of Mother Earth. Feel the energy of that living, sacred, feminine essence spiraling up through your being in a clockwise direction. Continuing until it's found its way all the way to the center of the universe. Connecting the heart of Mother Earth with the heart of the universe. Then imagine that sacred masculine element. It's a cool breeze following that trail down in a counterclockwise direction, winding all the way around the sacred feminine, down through the cosmos, through our atmosphere, down into the top of your head, through your being, all the way down to the heart of Mother Earth. So that you have these two spirals through the center of your being, dancing in relationship with one another. In the center of those two spirals, there is a space. This is our Medewalan space. This is our medicine space. Our sacred ceremonies are based off from this word, which comes from a term that describes the space between the wood and the skin on a drum, the space where sound is created. It is the same as the space in the center of a woman's body where life is created. It is this sacred space in between where all possibilities exist. The expression of that non-binary space has been moving out in the world, helping us to expand our awareness of the possibilities that we have as co-creators of this reality. Just take a moment and be with that energy. The sacred feminine, the sacred masculine, the space in between where all possibilities exist, where all life is created and all new things are born. Seat yourself there in the center of that space. From that space, I want you to imagine the world as it is. Just for a moment, just imagine the world as it is. Don't invest in those images, just observe. And on your next out breath, blow those away. And now from that sacred space in between, I want you to conjure an image of the world that you most want to inhabit. Bring it up slowly. What does it look like? How does it feel? Who do you have to be in order to exist there? Think about the qualities that you possess. Think about how you have to look at one another, speak to one another, care for one another. And then I want you to think about one thing that you can carry with you today and begin to implement and put into action. How can you today become a person who is capable of living in the world that you most want to inhabit? How can you become a world builder by becoming a citizen of the world that you're hoping to build today? I want you to take that and put it into your heart. Carry it with you. And every day for the next 40 days, as you're preparing to go to bed at night, take a small glass of water and say, I commit to bringing forth whatever the characteristic is that you're carrying with you. Drink half the water and then go to bed. The next morning, take the second half of that glass of water and say, as I place my feet on the floor on this day, I am committed to being an expression of this characteristic in the world. Repeat that for 40 days or 80 days or 120 days. And then go back into the space and bring forward the next characteristic until you are able to become the person that you most want to be, who is capable of living in the world that you most want to inhabit. Now I want you to envision these sacred energies cycling slowly back to source, unwinding, setting your being free, while the essence of them remains within you. Allow that energy to slide back into the heart of Mother Earth, that sacred feminine essence, and the energy of the sacred masculine to return to the center of the universe. Action-oriented, movement-causing energy. And allow the space that existed between them to expand within you and to move out into the world. And then slowly breathe into your heart space, beginning to bring yourself back to this moment in time, feeling the ground once again beneath you, hearing the sounds in the room, beginning to feel your fingers and toes. And then, when you're ready, you may slowly open your eyes and rejoin us here.
That's beautiful.
Oh my God, that was so the medicine I need. That I like a practice homework too.
Oh,
That
I
is my
know.
40 days.
I was just going to say, like, to me, the thing about meditation is you can touch these incredible places or just like expand in these ways. But if it doesn't follow you out into the world, you know, it might tune something and make it more accessible next time or 20 years from now. But the act of taking it into the world with intention, that's the core of ritual. So I'm always looking for like just more. So until all of your life is a ritual, you know, like every day, every waking moment, every part of sleep. And that is so beautiful and simple. I was thinking, you know, like what better thing to do because we all need more water. We're all dehydrated, you know. So it's like simultaneously something very practical, like drink some water before you go to bed and first thing in the morning, but also just anchoring that to this deeper, all-encompassing kind of wish for a better world is so beautiful.
Well, it was inspired. Thank you very much. That was beautiful. And I love how implicit in that guidance is that if we want a better world and we are absolutely allowed to dream it, and let's dream it, but you have to dream yourself into it. Who's the person you need to be in that world? And that really landed with me because I mean, it was easy for me to visualize that world, a world of people and communities connected to nature, and a more local world where we knew each other, we knew where our water and our food came from, we took care of each other, a global world with a respectful conversation where intelligence meets the challenges of the time, like the safety of a kind of discourse like that feeling of safety. And I could see the children, the laughter, the art, all of it. And well, who do I need to be in the middle of that? And that was a lot to ask because at first it was like, oh, I'm a little scared. Like, because at first I thought I have to be very strong to be in that world, to make that world happen, to move towards that. And then I kind of realized, yeah, but mostly I need to be present. Mostly what I need in my day to day are the things that we do on this podcast, actually, are the things that we do from our practice. But combined with that imagination, I need to be able to be present and loving with the people around me. I need to be grounded enough and had enough time in nature that I can notice that signal of what's important inside me. And then I need to be able to continually refresh that vision. And for that, practice is super, super important.
You know, the other thing that's really critical to know about that process is that, you know, we think about water as being this essential element of our physical body. But water is also the layer that exists between our physical and emotional body, between our emotional and spiritual body, between our spiritual body and the rest of life, you know, between the large S of our being and our oversoul. And it's a transmission element, you know, we're actually using the water to conduct the transmission of information between all levels of our being and between our being and all other life here in this place and beyond. And so, you know, when we are holding that water, we're informing every level of our being what our intention is, and we're taking that on. And so there's such beauty and power in that because water holds memory. Science is starting to catch up with some of these indigenous ramblings, right? And we're trying to explain, that the world is a living being that possesses consciousness and knowing and holds memory and can guide us and inform us. And we have this understanding now that the water that exists on the planet has moved through every living being that's existed since the beginning of life on Earth. What an incredible amount of wisdom that water contains. And so the stories that we have told to the water have helped shape our reality. So the stories that you speak into this water that is going to become part of this living earth have the capacity to amplify those messages. So it's a critical element of this practice.
I also wanted just to bring up something that came from me, because I know for sure it's going to come up for people at home, is that in the act of envisioning this better world, there's simultaneously this like deep hope. And like for me, I'm a very lively, excited person. I'm like so excited about change and building things in a really positive way. But at the same time, there's this deep feeling of doubt of like, could this ever actually be? And could I actually be this person? Like all that at the same time as you're dreaming large, there's this like deep kind of almost groundless abyss of like, who the fuck do you think you are? This is not, you cannot bring this into existence,
Yeah.
And the fight between those two, or not even the fight, but just this constant yin and yanging of those two, I feel like that's 100% like the embodiment of this moment that we're in, but just like the human condition in general, the pain of growing.
I think this is a really powerful moment for cultivating self-love. This is something that I've been working on my whole life, like everybody else. And one of the things that I had to move through in this process was forgiving myself for all the moments when I was not operating from a place of self-love, both internally and in all of its outward expressions. And I think that too often we hold ourselves to the fire for moments of doubt. We hold ourselves to the fire for uncharitable thoughts. We hold ourselves to the fire. And, I have this notion very early in my life that this whole concept of sin is not some external punishment imposed upon you. It's your own internal judgment directs the course of your life and leads you into situations where you are punishing yourself. And so in this process, forgiving ourselves for all of the moments of our humanity is critically important. How do we let go of this notion that we are supposed to be perfect, that we can't have doubts, that we can't have fears, that we can't question our capacity to do something that we don't have direct experience with having done? We have never collectively, consciously shifted the trajectory of the world together before. This is a new moment of evolution of our consciousness. This is a new opportunity for us to expand the capacities that we hold and to expand our awareness of those capacities so that we can begin to practically use the tools that we have been growing over the last several decades as we've been building out our vision boards. It's just a larger process of collective focused attention on building the world that we most want to inhabit. How do we write ourselves into the mythology of the future? This is the theme of most of our programs this year here at the Land Peace Foundation at the Wajukam Tiltina Kinship Community. And, really thinking about the truth in that. Who do you want to be in the story of the future? And how do you take active steps every day to become that person? And so we're rewriting, reframing the narrative of our future collectively right now, whether we're doing it consciously or not. We are, in fact, doing so. The evidence of it is our misapplication of the clairvoyant, stories that we believe are being told about the time we're living in. If we can really accept responsibility that we are actively co-creating this reality and that's evidence of it, then that empowers us in this moment when so many of us feel so powerless to actively engage this process of creating a new reality for us and for all those we love and for those who have not yet been born.
When you do this practice and when you live your life, because so much of what you're doing is about moving things down that birth canal, can you tell us what you see? What is the world that you're dreaming in, you're trying to dream in, if you don't mind?
Yeah. I think that when I think about the world that I most want to inhabit, that it is comprised of individuals who are affording one another deep grace. It is comprised of a world where individuals are demonstrating compassionate, tender care for one another. It is a world where we are more likely to become curious than cruel. And I think within those parameters, all things become possible. We can begin to build a world that's more kind, more equitable, more just, a world where people are willing to humanize themselves to one another and are willing to accept the humanity of others and to recognize the sacredness of every life. And so it's basically characteristics of being that can be cultivated realistically. That doesn't mean that all of our problems are going to go away, but it creates this baseline for us to be able to actually engage with them in ways that have the possibility of resolution, that we have really worked on our own emotional and spiritual maturity, that we recognize that we are individualized expressions of one living being that is attempting in this moment to understand itself more deeply, to find this expression of global self-love, universal self-love of this one living being that we ourselves within. If we can start thinking about it in those terms and start shifting our own hearts in that direction, I believe that we can create a world that moves us closer to the utopian view. I don't think that it's going to happen overnight. I don't think it's going to be easy. But I think if we have a willingness within us and a commitment towards that, then we'll get there. And, one of the things that my partner and I have been talking a lot about is about the difference between compliance and commitment. Are you doing something because you're trying to be compliant with a way that you think you're supposed to act?
Oh, yeah.
Are you agreeing to something on a surface level without really feeling into the depth of it? Because when we feel things only on a surface level, then our actions become shallow. We can't act deeply if we're skimming across the surface. Or are we deeply committed and convicted because of something within us that wants to be our best selves? Not our perfect selves, but our kindest selves, our most loving selves, our most compassionate selves. Are we committed to that process? And I believe that if we become committed rather than compliant to all of the things around us that tell us this is how you're supposed to behave, this is what normal looks like, this notion that being kind is fringe, being cruel and strategic in cutthroat ways is a strength rather than a weakness. This distortion in our minds that's led us so far off track. If we can adjust that distortion and move ourselves back into alignment with the truth of our own hearts, connected to divine source, I think we're going to get there. And that doesn't become an expression of spiritual bypassing, because we walk through the fire with that groundedness, not around it.
I just want to say something here. I think part of what I found so exciting about your work and this voice is, how am I going to put this? Like, I have grown up as a realist. I used to be a journalist. I My job was to pay attention to the news of the world, and I took in a lot of these basic, what we would call kind of humanistic framework of it's going to be fucked, but we're going to just do the best we can. And visions for a better future. Yeah, yes, there's a kind of narrative of progress, but I didn't really believe it. And I can have lots of imagine. I mean, I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction. I have a lot of imaginative capacity to imagine a better world, but do I really think that world can come into being? To me, it's always the salt in the stew. It's always the bittersweetness. And I still think that's a realistic view in some ways. But you gave me, especially at the end, when you talk about all of these different prophetic traditions coming from within Indigenous communities, but even beyond, that there has been a long dreaming. Some of the deepest thinkers that have ever lived on the planet have understood that there's something gathering very special this time. And I've always nervous around prophetic stuff, but it's so convincing what you described. Just the fact that all of these narratives overlapping each other and that you have been involved in that. And these stories are all pointing to not only the pivotalness of this time, but a kind of roadmap, a kind of a way in which we become alienated, but then we look back towards Indigenous and wisdom traditions to kind of find what we're about. And even to the point where for you, like you started a group that began a ceremony 7 years ago now, or 8 years ago now, on the east coast of the United States near your tribal homelands in Maine, that spent 4 years there. The fire spent 4 years there, and that's moved to the south. Now it's moved to the west, and there's a whole trajectory and a set of years. So, I mean, can you say anything about that? I think it would be very inspiring for people to hear about it and any resource to learn more about it.
Yeah, we haven't determined the exact location of the ceremony in the West. This will be the first year in the West. But this ceremony comes out of one of our prophecies about the reopening of the Eastern spiritual doorway. And our tribes here in Chwabanakieg, we are the peoples of first contact. And so we have had the longest engagement with those who came to this land and sought to do us harm. Our people met the newcomers with compassion, with an intent to help, tried to feed them, show them how to live in this environment that was very different from their own, and were slaughtered. I have a proclamation that I kept in my office for a number of years on the bounty that was put out on the heads of my people, which I have since taken down and no longer look at on a daily basis, But once those ancestors recognized what was happening, knowing what they know of spirit, they recognized that for us in this territory, the East is the direction of creation, that what is born under that Eastern spiritual doorway continues to travel, spreading out to the north and the south, all the way to the Western door, which is where it exits this world and goes into the land of spirit. And that what was happening here had to be stopped. So they ceremonially closed that Eastern spiritual doorway so that it would slow down the progression of violence that was being experienced here. And the Healing the Wounds of Turtle Island ceremony, which started in 2017, reopened that Eastern doorway, and people met under that doorway for 4 years, building the vision of a new reality for human beings and between human beings and the rest of the living world. We have since had more than 50,000 people from 6 continents who have been praying together in relation to the ceremony, and it grows every year. This is going to be the first year that we are back together. So the ceremony is 4 years under that Eastern doorway, which is the direction of creation. Then it moved to the south, which is spiritual and emotional healing. Now it's moving to the west, which is the gestational phase for the new life, the new world that's being created. And then it will come to the north, which is the walking out phase. And it's 4 years in each of those directions. And then it will be held by all of those prayers in the center for another 4 years so that till it can stand up on its own. And then we will come back to the east in the 21st year and close the ceremony. And so, this ceremony is something that belongs to all of us. It's something that we all can participate in. It's something that we can carry the fire of that in our hearts. There are a lot of people around the world who have come to the fire and have taken a tiny coal from that fire home with them and started fires in their own communities where they have shared those teachings and built community and begun to do the work of that healing in their own territories. So we encourage appreciation. We encourage sharing of certain teachings without appropriation, helping people understand that there's an important lesson in learning how to come to Indigenous people and to receive without taking. Far too often people come to Indigenous people to learn something so that they can commodify it and put it on the market. How do you come receive something that you take within you to heart without turning it into something saleable for yourself? So that's all been part of how do we move ourselves as human beings out of the commodities market? How do we move ourselves out of this capitalistic flow that has minimized the value of our lives, that has diminished the sacredness of our bodies? And so, it's causing us to look at things from multiple perspectives in much deeper ways. And we do know that we will be somewhere in California for the opening of the Western doorway, and that'll probably happen in the fall. We'll post it on our website.
Well, the dreaming is more important than ever, the visioning. I mean, this is the time for that. And I would love to come to that fire, grab a coal, and just to lay it out there, by my calculations, that's 2038. We'll be finish that cycle. So we've got an interesting 8 years at least, and more than that. You're helping to bring that forward, and we're just so much gratitude to you, Sherri Mitchell, for the work you do. And there's so much more to talk about too. So maybe you're interested in coming on again, in a few months or something, or when your book's ready or whatever you think, because there's much more to say.
Yeah. I will say one thing in closing, that this time is very special because we're standing on the edge of an evolutionary leap and we're aware of it. And so we have much greater control over directing the course of that leap and where it will take us next. And I think if we can recognize that and harness the potential of this moment, that we have an incredible possibility of creating something that is really much more in alignment with the way that most of us want to live. So thank you for having me. Thank you for this conversation. And thank you to all those who are listening, who have their ears trained on higher ways of being in relationship with one another.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, friend.
Thanks for adventuring with us. Pop over to mindbodpod.com and let us know in the comments how this episode landed for you. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. And if you want to support our crazy adventures, get fun perks and exclusives along the way, join us as a paid subscriber. See you next week.